Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Taking the Trauma Out of COVID-19, sponsored by the Fairfield County Building Trauma-Informed Systems BTIS initiative, presented by Dean Rallof. My name is April Wagner, and I am a member of the BTIS initiative and host for your event today. I'm the Employment Support Coordinator at Fairfield County Board of Developmental Disabilities. Trauma-informed care practices have been increasingly used in a variety of areas, including social services, education, behavioral health, and legal systems to address the needs of individuals who have experienced traumatic life events. This virtual conference is intended to increase our community's capacity to develop a broad approach toward addressing trauma-based practices and a shared understanding of trauma and its impact through a collective response that supports resilience and healing. The BTIS initiative in Fairfield County is comprised of a multitude of community partners. This virtual conference would not have been possible without their dedication in organizing and presenting the content, providing credits, and facilitating the event. This training is being recorded. The training may be available for public view. We will be hosting the training on a speaker view, and the chat box will be monitored throughout the training. Please enter all questions or comments into the chat box. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the evaluation survey for the training and a copy of the PowerPoint. This evaluation must be returned to receive your CEU credit. All participants will receive a certificate of attendance. Please also indicate your attendance today by entering your first and last name in the chat box by the end of today's session. Thank you to the BTIS members on the platform today, and thank you for attending this training. I would like to take a moment to introduce our speaker. Dean Rallof earned his master's degree in clinical psychology from Bowling Green State University with a focus on behavioral medicine, neuropsychology, and psychophysiology. I practiced on that one, Dean, just so you know. I had to make sure I got it right. He worked primarily with people in a medical center setting who experienced chronic and life-threatening illnesses before becoming involved in healthcare management and administration. Dean is currently employed with the Fairfield County Board of Developmental Disabilities, where he has worked for the past 4.5 years, developing support plans to improve individuals' functioning in their communities, primarily utilizing the principles of positive behavior support and trauma-informed supports. So please join me in welcoming Dean.
Thank you very much, April. It's good to see everyone, kind of. Welcome to our presentation this afternoon. This talk kind of came out of a need at the beginning of the close down when we all had the stay-at-home orders to kind of give people some guide on how to talk to individuals with developmental disabilities. And so at this point, you know, I thought, well, let's see what we can do and just kind of helping people understand the nature of the COVID virus, how it impacts our lives and relates to trauma-informed care. And hopefully you'll find some things that'll help you talk with others who may be struggling with this problem in their life, or maybe even how you talk to yourself and deal with the stress that comes from coping in today's environment with the COVID virus. So first, just want to talk a little bit about stress. I was probably a little optimistic when I chose the title for this presentation because you can't really totally eliminate trauma, obviously, from people's lives or the experience of stress. So I'm sorry to report that, you know, coping with COVID-19 will cause stress, and it will always cause us stress as long as it's around. But stress isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Stress in our bodies communicates something to us that there is something going on that's wrong, that's challenging us, and that we need to develop a response to. And it's up to us to decide how we want to respond to these challenges in our life. And hopefully what we talk about today will give you a little bit of guidance with that. Most people probably on this talk have experience with trauma-informed care.
You don't even need to be logged in to do it.
So I'm not going to spend a lot of time
Oh,
talking.
you want the email? Scroll all the way to the bottom.
We have an Emily Swick on here whose microphone is still on. Thank you. I expect these types of things to happen because I understand we have quite a large audience today, which is a little bit overwhelming, but I'll do my best. I'm actually talking to you from the loft in my small house in Perry County, Ohio. I know that we have one person visiting our talk today all the way from Honolulu, so welcome to you all. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the definition of trauma. Most people have definitions of trauma or, you know, have some basic understanding what it is, but want to talk about a few aspects of the definition. One is to understand that a lot of times it's a perceived threat. It doesn't have to actually be a true threat in order for someone to respond to it in a stressful way. And so we want to make sure that we understand that perception plays a role in how people see their world and how they adjust to it. That trauma can have multiple different types of characteristics. It can be a prolonged exposure, it can be a repeated exposure, it can be an intense exposure to a source of trauma. And then it really does become trauma when it ends up being a long-lasting alteration in how we adapt to our world, whether it's in our emotional regulation, how we see ourselves, how we see our world, and our relationships within that world can be changed by these types of experiences. And we need to understand that it is an individual experience. We all experience challenges in our life differently. We all cope with the stress of these challenges differently. And this is important to realize that because we respond a certain way, it doesn't mean others respond in the same way that we do. So I just wanted to kind of briefly go over those points. As I started thinking about this presentation too, one of the things, it dawned on me just how broad the effects of the COVID-19 virus have been and how broad they continue to be. We've kind of been in this world now for a little over 7 months, and it just doesn't seem to quit, you know. And so one of the things is the long-lasting impact of this pandemic on our lives and how we've had to change our lives from loss of familiar and comfortable routines that, you know, we all depend upon in order to start our days, and now make life a little more complicated because now we have new and unfamiliar ones, although these new ones are starting to become very familiar to us as well. We have this sense of loss of choice, you know, of what we can and can't do. And we had to develop new skills to adapt to this world, including myself, and even doing meetings on Zoom and presentations like this on Zoom still cause me some stress because it still feels new to me and unusual and unpredictable. So loss of social networks, contact with people, and having to find new ways to connect with people and to stay in touch with people that are important to us. For some, it even extends to loss of jobs and financial stability. And for those, and for many people, maybe perhaps having to find new work and develop new skills. And all the way to the extreme of loss of life. I'm hoping that people watching today, all your families and friends have been safe, but also realize that, you know, many people have experienced loss of loved ones, of friends, of family, not only in our country, but across the world. And so the impacts of this virus go from perhaps the uncomfortable all the way to extreme trauma depending on what your particular situation is. And for the people that we work with, as well as we want to talk with them about this change in our world, we have to keep in mind that how broad these changes are in people's lives, and the spectrum of these changes that can impact a person's life. So things that influence whether something is traumatic for an individual. So we know there's certain aspects of the trauma itself that can make it more or less impactful, such as the duration, the intensity, the frequency, it coming upon us with no warning, the scope and number of people impacted. So we know with something like COVID-19 that this is a traumatic event in our world. It's something that has changed lives across the globe, and it has far-reaching effects beyond our personal lives even. But then there's also personal factors that affect our ability to cope well with trauma, even our genetics. You know, we know from research at birth, there's kind of like two basic types of people born. We have those that are kind of the relaxed and calm baby, and then those that seem to be the reactive baby. I remember one time talking with my mom as I was learning about behavioral health, you know, what kind of baby I was. And she said, well, you were kind of a pain. She goes, you reacted to everything. There was foods you didn't like. You didn't sleep through the night. You caught everything that was going around. You were just always fussy. And then I asked her what kind of baby my brother was. And he was always kind of, for those that remember the show, Happy Days, he was kind of the Fonzie in our family. He was always cool and collected and calm. And even when he was an infant, he would sleep through the night. He ate everything. He never got sick. You know, so our genetics play a big role in how we're prepared to deal with things in our world. The age at which we experience the trauma, which is, you know, kind of connected to our coping skills, because as we go through life, we develop different coping skills, things that help us deal with challenges and overcome those barriers in our life. So the younger we are, usually the bigger the impact trauma experiences can have on us. What our social connections are, what type of network we have around us to help us deal with things in our life. You know, when we're young, it's primarily our family. You know, are they a secure family? Is the family stable? Are there other things going on in the family at the time we experience certain traumas that can impact those connections and our ability to trust? Our previous experiences with barriers and challenges in our life help us work through trauma either more or less effectively. And as I thought about this particular item, one of the things that crossed my mind was that it's been a long time since our country especially has had to deal with something with such far-reaching consequences. That, you know, it's really been since World War II and the Great Depression, times that my parents had lived through. You know, since that time, we haven't really had to give up things that we wanted to be able to do like we have had to today. And this is, for many people in our culture, this is a new experience to have to make these types of sacrifices and to come to understanding that there are things in our world that we cannot control. And that's unsettling. We don't like that sense of loss of control. And then also, you know, the other thing that impacts us as we go through this is that other things don't stop happening in our lives. Other things don't stop happening in our world. You know, simultaneously and concurrently, other things are going on, from Black Lives Matter to increases in physical and violence in many of the cities across our country. even the contentious election that we're moving toward at this point. This all creates additional stress in our life and continues to challenge further our resilience to handle these things in an effective way. And so, the COVID-19 virus is just one thing that we deal with because all these other things continue. If you have health problems, that is still something that you have to cope with. It just seems like today things don't ever end. And 2020, as we were talking earlier, as people were coming into the workshop today, 2020 has just been one of those years. We have the fires out west, the hurricanes down south. There's always more to be dealing with, and it just seems like it's never going to end sometimes. So we need to figure out how we want to respond to all of this. So our body reacts to challenges, to stress, to trauma, whatever word you want to use to describe this. And we talk about three basic responses. We have our fight response, we have our flight response, and we have a freeze response. So our fight response is when we're going to take on the challenge head on. If we're not doing it real successfully or real functionally, it may look a lot like agitation toward everything. When anything small happens, when we're feeling overloaded, and even if it is something small, it may just be too much for us and it causes us greater agitation. So our fight response is a good thing, but when we're overwhelmed, the fight response itself may overwhelm us. And so the small things that we were able to handle at one time in our life now become more difficult to handle. We have the flight response, which is marked primarily by avoidance responses. We make believe things don't exist, or we try to avoid the challenges in our life, and we kind of isolate ourselves. The last thing would be the freeze response, where we just kind of shut down. We go into denial, or we start to blame others for what's happening to us and why our life isn't the way we would like it to be. So when you start seeing these negative consequences in your own response or in the response to others, it may be an indication that things are starting to become overwhelming for them. And it's really time to start thinking about how can we support that individual, or how do we support ourselves in a way that allows us to continue to build resilience, that allows us a way to continue to meet these challenges and to meet them in a productive way. So our goal whenever we're having a significant trauma response is always to have that sense of safety and control. And there's different types of safety though. There's physical safety, of course, and that certainly is a predominant type of safety in light of the COVID-19 virus. And that is that ability to keep our body safe from harm. But there's also emotional safety, the ability to safely express ourselves and to share our feelings with others, to feel like we're being heard, that we're being understood, and that our response is a legitimate response in the world, even if it is one where we feel overwhelmed. Social safety, the ability to be safe in groups and treated with respect, acceptance of our differences and how we deal with things. And then, of course, there's also moral safety, to interact in our environment in an honest way, and to be able to trust what we're being told about our world, that it is true, and that we can trust the people around us. So to feel safe is really what our goal is, and to feel like we have some control in our life. And in this day and age, it seems to be becoming more difficult for us. But I'm hoping everyone has found ways to do the things that we're going to talk about today, And many of you probably are practicing some of the things we will talk about today as well. So as I look at the issue, fear is anxiety. And when anxiety wells up and becomes too great, it begins to have a negative impact on us. So when I think about managing fear and anxiety, I think about some basic things we need to have in our life. And one of those things is predictability. Being able to know what's going to happen when. Having some type of schedule. Being able to know what's coming down the pike in the future to some extent. When we have predictability, we have a sense of control. And we feel like we can prepare ourselves for what is happening. And that's why knowing about the virus and communicating about the virus and telling the truth about the virus is so important, because we need to know what it is and what to expect from it in order to have some sense of predictability. Next, I think of familiarity. We are comfortable in our routines. I noticed for myself, one of the things that I thought about as I started working from home was that, I don't have to dress the same way. I don't have to do all the same routines that I used to do when I got ready for work, and quickly realized that this wasn't a functional way for me to respond, and that I really needed to try and get back as much as possible into the types of routines that I always did when I got ready for work before the virus became a part of our lives, and found that that was helpful for me, to kind of set myself as much as possible to go to bed at the same time the night before a work day, to get up at the same time, to do the same chores, to get myself ready for work in many of the same ways. And that familiarity helped me manage some of the anxiety I was experiencing. So, it's important to try and maintain your routines as much as possible, or if you're helping others, look at how you can reestablish routines in their life as well that are familiar to them, because this does help us manage feelings of anxiety. Having choice, having a sense of control. When we're working with others, making sure we're giving them choices in their lives, so that they feel like that there is still something in their life that they can control. Having choice is imperative in our life. We've had a lot of choices taken away from us during this time, so it's important to find other ways to introduce choice as a part of our life. The next is belonging, or being connected to others. We are still experimenting with new ways to do that, as we are today through Zoom and doing virtual trainings, right? It still feels odd. I feel like I'm sitting here in my house just having a conversation with myself. So it doesn't have the same connectedness as when you're with people live, and I realize that I miss that as well. But there are other ways to find these connections too, even if it's with pets, through your faith, through doing things that maybe you didn't pay as much attention to before in your life, like sending out anniversary cards and birthday cards to stay connected with people. If you're using, social media platforms like Zoom or other types of platforms, connect with someone that way. You don't even necessarily need to carry on a conversation. Sometimes it's just nice to see a person's face. That helps you feel connected. And I think that's why doing presentations this way is just so awkward for me, because even as I share my screen, the only things that show up are these little black boxes with people's names, and you don't see faces, you don't see reactions, you don't see, you don't have that same way of connecting with people. So being able to connect with the people you're closest to is going to become even more imperative. And that's been difficult for many people. We haven't been used to spending this much time with a small group of people, and it has caused discord in many relationships for people. But finding ways to connect with others is going to be imperative for us as we continue to manage the fear and anxiety that exist with the challenges that the COVID virus has presented to us. It may even be through, if there's someone who lives near you that you really like, make them a nice meal and drop it off on their porch, and then perhaps invite them to a Zoom meeting and eat the meal together. We just need to be more creative on how we do these connections these days. And also feeling like you accomplishing something. This is something that's particularly important for me. And so I've been spending more time doing yard work and fall chores and stuff to feel like I'm getting things done and to give me a sense of accomplishment, because getting other things done has been much more complicated and challenging these days. And the statement I put on the bottom really kind of goes back to this whole idea of what we can still do for managing these basic elements of anxiety and fears. You don't have to change everything in the face of this virus. Look for those things that you can still keep as a part of your life, and maybe even enhance them at this point to still give you that sense, because it does feel like everything is changing around us. There's a lot of things that are challenging us these days, but make sure you're looking for those things that you can still keep as a part of your life, and making sure that you have things that are familiar, that you are incorporating choice, that you have predictability, that you have connections with others, and that you're doing things that make you feel like you're accomplishing things. And I think this is true for the people we help as well. So one of the things we need to talk about is, if we're talking with others about the virus, how do we do this? And I'm just going to talk at first about two basic strategies. The first is the "what is happening to you" question. And if you're familiar with trauma-informed care, you know this is a basic question. And it's a change from the way we approach mental health issues than from when I was in graduate school, where we would ask people about, well, what's bothering you today? Or what is your problem? Or what is wrong? And we always tend to put it on the person. Well, we want to change that conversation, because when we ask something, what is wrong with you, if they're not adjusting well to their world, then we make them feel different. We are re-traumatizing them. We're isolating them in a way. And I remember a conversation I had with one of my brother's friends. He came back from the Gulf War as a combat soldier and was diagnosed with PTSD and had been struggling with it for several years before I met him. And I was over at my brother's house visiting one time. And of course, because I had a background in psychology and my brother's friend was there, he said, well, you should talk to my brother, Dean. He's trained in psychology. Maybe he can help you. And so we started having a conversation. And I just asked, and my brother's friend's name was Cowboy. That was his nickname. And I just said, well, Cowboy, what's going on in your life? What's happening? And he started talking about how he was feeling about himself. And he couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. You know, that he still couldn't sleep. He was still having panic attacks. He was still overreacting to things. And it was really concerning to him. And he said, why can't this be fixed? He said, I've been in counseling, I've seen a number of therapists, and it doesn't seem to change. And he goes, what is wrong with me? And the only response I had for him was, well, I don't think there really is anything wrong with you. I said, our government put you in a very bad situation, an abnormal situation, a situation we don't find ourselves in. And I said, I think you're having a normal response to it. And by talking to him about just having a normal response to something that was overwhelming for him as a soldier, you could see a lot of his tension and anxiety just start to melt away. And he just looked at me and he said, I never thought of it that way. And it was interesting to see how he took that information and how it helped him just by not seeing himself as being the problem, and that it was about something that happened to him that changed him, and that really how he was reacting to something that was so horrific in his life was really something that many people deal with, and that he wasn't alone. And this gave him some solace. This gave him some peace with himself. And it did allow him then start to engage the world in a different way. So it's important for us to make sure that when we initiate conversations with people, that we do it in such a way that allows them to connect with us, that allows them to see them as a person having a real response to a real challenge, and that you're going to be there with them. And that takes us to what I just referred to as active listening, or the reflect, honor, and connect process. So this is just about being there with someone and recognizing their experience as being a valid one, and allowing them to have that experience, and then connecting them to a future that can be different. So the best example I have that for myself is, since I come to work here in Fairfield County, is I was working with an individual who had some difficulties in their life, I guess you could say. They were someone who, when they became stressed, when they became overwhelmed by things, and it didn't take much, that, this individual would hit people, he would drag people down to the ground, he would scratch them, and he would become quite physically aggressive. And one day I was walking down a hallway at the adult day service he was attending. And as he walked toward me, I just noticed he was upset. And I was the only one in the hallway. So I'll have to admit, my initial response was a little bit of fear. Because I thought, God, there's no one else here. He's coming for me. And I knew about this guy. But we had had some type of relationship. So as he approached me, I just looked at him and I said, wow, you look really upset. And you could tell he wasn't used to people hearing him before he even started to talk. And he just kind of stopped in his tracks. And he was about 10 feet away from me. And he just looked at me. And I said, well, what's happening? What's going on? And so he looked at me and he said, my roommate this morning, he got up, he went into the refrigerator and he took one of my pops and he drank it right in front of me. Now, my response at this point could have been, well, that's not such a big deal. It's just a pop. I could have minimized it. But I'm guessing if I would have minimized his experience, he would have maximized his response toward me. So I just looked at him and I said, wow, I can see why that would get you upset, right? I validated his personal experience, and that allowed him to connect with me and to feel supported. And then I simply thanked him for sharing that information with me. Because for a lot of us, right, sharing our emotions is a scary thing. It makes us vulnerable. When we share our emotion, we open ourselves up to others. And if we're already feeling overwhelmed by the challenges in our life, including the virus, including Black Lives Matter, including floods and fires and all this stuff that's going on with all the other normal day-to-day pressures and challenges that we face, right? You know, if we don't feel like our emotion is valid, we shut down. But when we're willing to open up, we have to see that as an opportunity to connect with someone, not just to tell them, oh, things will be fine. Because for them in that moment, it's not. So at that point, then what I did is I just asked him, well, what do you think I can do to help? And I knew his roommate. And I knew his roommate probably took that pop out that morning and drank it in front of this other guy just to tick him off. But I let the first fella tell me, he goes, well, I want you to go talk to my roommate and I want you to tell him he has to buy me a pop. And I told him what I could and couldn't do. I said, well, I can talk to your roommate, but I said, I can't make him buy you a pop. I said, will that be enough? And again, I just wanted to let him know what I was able to do and what I was not able to do. And he just looked at me and he said, that's enough. And when I connected with him in this way, you could just see all the anxiety and anger just kind of go away. Now, the pop drinking obviously wasn't a major trauma for this gentleman, but it was a big one for him. And it was something he was having difficulty handling, and no one else was helping him handle it to that point. And so I did talk to his roommate. Now, the roommate actually did, he confessed to me he did it on purpose so that he could get a reaction out of his roommate. And he decided after our conversation he would go buy him a pop. So it did have a happy ending after all. So the next part I'm going to talk about is just something I put together for talking with people with developmental disabilities about how to engage in a conversation about the virus. But I think really this can be used with anyone. And I got this from reading things on the internet and information from other sources and just kind of put it into my own words as well. So the first is to promote reassurance and not to promote fear and anger in people, right? Because let's face it, sometimes too much information about a trauma can also be re-traumatizing. And sometimes we even have to avoid some of the information about the virus to help ourselves through the day. The information such as, how many people have it, how many people have been hospitalized, how many people have passed away due to the pandemic. This type of information can actually become overwhelming for people. So we want to provide information, though, that empowers people, right? Information that they can use to feel like they're doing something in response to the challenge. Whether it's teaching people about washing their hands and social distancing, or how to make a mask, how to connect with other people, how to help them adjust their lives so that they can still meet their primary needs. So it's not about providing information that, overwhelms them, which often is what we generally get if we watch the news. And I'll be honest, sometimes I avoid watching the news because I just don't want to hear about it. But if we can use information as a way to empower people, this can help them. This can reassure them. This can give them a sense of control and power and of choice so that they can begin to respond in a more informed and in a more positive manner to the challenge that they're facing. Promote interdependence and helping others. So we want to help people understand what we do impacts others, that this isn't something just happening to them. And sometimes, and I'll admit there's been days where my routine has been disrupted, and for all of us, the first thing that comes into our head is just, well, the whole day is just going to go south now, right? I remember the first day I worked from home and I couldn't make my computer connect to the things I needed it to connect to and to get the files I needed to do my job. And, you know, it's like I felt like the top of my head was going to blow up. And I'm sure other people out there today listening have had similar experiences. And we feel like, God, this is only happening to me. Why does this stuff always happen to me? We got to realize that this isn't about fairness because it's happening to everyone. We're not being treated unfairly by this thing. It is something that is happening, and it's happening for everyone. But what we do can also impact others. And sometimes by connecting ourselves to others in this way, it frees us up. If by doing this it helps someone, then it's something that's meaningful, and it brings meaning to what our lives are in that moment. So as we talk with people about the COVID virus and we're doing things with them and we're connecting with them, it's important to understand that we're only limited by our creativity by how we can do this. You know, I talked earlier about belonging and connectedness, and, you know, whether it's sending someone an encouraging card or an encouraging note that you know is having a difficult time with this. And I think it wasn't too long ago, I think in the past year, where one of the crisis lines, I think it was out west in either Oregon or Washington, were crisis lines after they talked with people who were suicidal, had suicidal ideations and maybe even intent, that they would send them cards. And that these cards that they got from the crisis line meant so much to the individual that someone cared enough to just write a few words of encouragement to them. And that this really helped them feel like they mattered in the world and that they didn't feel as isolated. So when we help others too, it makes us not feel so isolated. Perceived strategies, not bad behavior. If someone is having a hard time adjusting to what's going on in their life and overcoming the barriers that are currently there, don't just see this as bad behavior. And I know in the world of developmental disabilities, we throw around the word behavior left and right as if it explains what's going on. But really what we're seeing are strategies to adapt to a world that's confusing to someone, that's challenging to someone who feels like they don't have choice, to someone who feels like they don't have any power over what happens to them, you know, which a lot of us are struggling with these days. And all of us have personal strategies on how to deal with things. But really what we're trying to do is survive. And some of the things we do are probably very positive and help us move through this in a positive way. And then there's probably times where we choose strategies that we may look at later and say, why did I say that? Why did I do that? That wasn't very helpful. So whether you're trying to help another person or you're looking at yourself, don't look at it as you're doing something bad or you're doing something wrong. Just understand that what you're trying to do and what everybody else is trying to do is find a strategy that works, that helps them survive through this time. Promote relationships and new connections when you talk to other people. How can they connect with people that are important in their life and do it in a safe way? You know, even doing in-person contacts can still be done. I've been doing them, not to as great as the extent as I did before the pandemic hit, but I will go into people's homes if I feel like it'll make a difference. And I'll tell you, the precautions do work, because I have been exposed at least on one occasion to the virus, but I followed precautions. and came away from that interaction in person, COVID-free. It did make me even a little more cautious, though. It did kind of scare me when I found out this particular individual did show up with a positive test. And it has made me more cautious, and it makes me be just be more watchful of what I choose to do. But, you know, having relationships and connections is so important to us. And there's so many people out there that are struggling with having connection with others because of the virus, because they struggled even before this event occurred. And so it's with those people we really have to look for new and creative ways for them to connect with other individuals. So when you have conversations with people, you know, identify the people that are important to them. How do we connect them, whether it's telephone calls or Zoom contacts, whether it's letter writing, card writing, stopping by the house and talking outside with people, meeting people in a park where you can socially distance, but making sure that, because to get through this, we are all going to need to be connected, but we just need to do it in a safe and positive way. Use this experience too as a way to evaluate what you want out of it. Document this experience. Work with people to document their experience. Putting words to things sometimes can be very helpful in helping us identify what's happening inside of us. You know, learn from this experience. What can we take away from this? We're already talking in our own agency about, you know, new ways we found to work that actually work quite well in a lot of situations, and how do we integrate these new changes when we go back to the old go back to the office. You know, we don't want to throw away positive experiences from having lived through this. So it's important to document what's working and what's not working. You know, look for ways to create purpose each day, you know, so that there's a reason for moving forward, and helping those that we serve to create purpose in their lives. And that may even be looking for opportunities for them to volunteer where they can help people directly. It not only gives them purpose, it also gives them connection. You know, these things overlap with each other, and we need to continue to look for ways to assist people through that process. So other things we can do to promote resilience in ourselves and in others, you know, exercise, getting physical activity. A lot of us may have become a lot more sedentary over the last 7 months. And I know I had to become more physically active. I'm not a great exerciser. I'm not a treadmill walker or a weightlifter. I like doing things that have an outcome. So I saw wood by hand. I split wood with an axe. I like gardening and hauling mulch. We have animals that we take care of, so that all keeps me pretty busy. Other types of physical activity that are advantageous, though, are rhythmic expressions. You know, dancing, yoga, things of that nature where we move our body in rhythms. It helps us become aware of what's going on in our body and aware of our body in space. And it makes us more aware of how we're feeling. So rhythmic expressions can be helpful. We know that these types of activities also release our endogenous opioids, right? An important neurochemical in our body that is involved with stress mitigation and feelings of joy. And we know that feelings of joy are important for us to build resilience and to maintain our resilience as we go through this, because there's probably not a soul on this talk today that is just tired of all of this, that you feel fatigued at times by all of this. Touch is important. You know, there's some literature out there that talks about oxytocin, the trust hormone, which is released by touch. Hugging people. I have one guy who has multiple issues going on in his life. He has significant mental health issues. He has an intellectual disability. He has a trauma history, and now he's living through the COVID virus as well. And he's also been going through medication changes. And he's one of the people I go see because I know he needs in-person connection. And we do safety hugs, and he'll hug the stuffing out of me. But we do it in a safe way. And, you know, that touch is important to us. Now, you do have to be careful, of course, with touch, because for some people, touch can also be a trauma trigger for them. So you need to know where your relationship is at with the individual, what role touch plays in their life, how you can still use touch with them by even just asking permission to touch. Finding other sources of joy in our life. Don't forget to be playful and engaging your senses in a playful way. You know, you can do this as a family. You can do this with friends. Find ways to laugh, right? Laughing is an excellent medicine. We need to be creative in doing some of these things. So, you know, try new foods. Experiment, make up your own recipes and see if people like them, right? You know, maybe even try and create something that, you know, people may not enjoy so much. Don't be too cruel to them, but, you know, it can be kind of fun, you know, joking around with things like that. But engaging our senses is important. You know, that's why movement is important. It engages our proprioception, and touch is important. But also smells are important, and visuals are important. We can't forget those things. Tastes are important. What we hear is important. You know, my wife and I love live music. We haven't been able to go see live music in a long time now, and so we listen to music. It's still not the same, but we're trying to find ways of enjoying things we used to enjoy in new ways as well, by engaging our senses, finding fun, and, you know, doing things that are creative as well. Practice mindfulness. You know, doing breathing exercises can be helpful. One of the things I know with breathing to people is that, you know, out of all our physiological responses, it's the one that we can take direct control over. We breathe a certain way when we're angry. We breathe a certain way when we're fearful. We breathe a certain way when we're depressed. We also breathe certain ways when we're happy. We also breathe certain ways when we're joyful. We also breathe certain ways when we're relaxed and satisfied. So mindful breathing can be any different types of breathing. We're usually taught relaxation breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, you know, slow and easy, you know, be mindful of your breath. But simply just by breathing certain ways, we can begin to change some of our emotional experience.
Right, right. Well, what's going to
Giving,
happen as far as if he stops breathing is you call Sunny and she'll come.
giving is important. There's a lot of research out there that shows, you know, we get more joy out of giving than we do out of receiving. There was a study a number of years ago where they gave a group of people $100 and said, go spend it on yourself. And then a group of people, they gave $100 and said, go spend it on someone who you think deserves it. And then they came back and had the people rate their levels of happiness. And by far, the people who gave away the money were happier than the people who spent the money on themselves. So giving is a great way to introduce joy into your life and mindfulness. Be thankful, right? There's a lot of things to complain about. There's a lot of things that we can focus on that are negative that are going on right now. But we also need to spend time focusing on the things that we can be thankful for. Some other things just to keep in mind real quick, some general phrases you can use when engaging others or even when you're engaging yourself in self-talk. That you're glad you're here today, right? Or with other people. It's nice to see you. You know, being friendly is important. Provide encouragement. You can do this. You can get through this. You know, recognitions. You did a great job today finishing your schoolwork. You know, be specific with that recognition. Let them know what you're proud about. Encouraging people. It will get better. It will change. And it can be different in the future, right? This is all true, but a lot of times we forget that that can be true because we get caught up in the negative self-talk. Include people. Make sure you're asking them to join you when they're ready. Don't force joining, but let them know that when they're ready, you'll be there for them. Let them know you're there to help keep them safe. Ask them how you can help them feel safe. And just accept people. I'm so glad I get to spend more time together with you. The people I work with always hear me tell this story. Before I came to work here in Fairfield County 4.5 years ago, I spent 25 years in healthcare management and administration, and I tell them, you know, in 20 years, I never did anyone ever come up to me and say, I'm glad you're here. And when I started working for this organization, in the first 2 weeks, I think I heard it 200 times. And there's nothing that makes you feel better than knowing people are glad you're there with them. And it didn't make me want to work less hard for my new coworkers. It really made me want to work very hard. So the last things I'm going to leave you with is just some questions to answer for yourself. You know, what is your story going through this time? Or help someone else write their story. What is your purpose in this experience? Or help someone else find their purpose. What do you want to learn about yourself? And how do you want to move forward? Or how do you want to help this other person move forward that you may be assisting? And the most important thing we all need to realize is that none of us can do this alone. You know, whether it's just using our friends and family, our co-workers to help us through in helping others or in helping ourselves, or seeking out professional help when we need it, when we need a counselor, when we've dug a hole too deep for ourselves, where we know we're going to need a hand out of the pit we're currently in. So don't be afraid to make yourself vulnerable, because it's, even though making ourselves vulnerable can be very scary. I know it is for me. And as a white male, I have difficulty sharing feelings often. And sometimes I struggle gravely with that. And I need help at times for people to help me express myself. But, you know, it can do a lot of good, because it's out of vulnerability that we can sometimes actually move forward. So it's been about an hour. Thanks for listening. Thanks for inviting me to talk today. I hope you found some of this information helpful.
Thank you so much, Dean. Before everyone logs off, if you could make sure, if you haven't already, put your name in the chat box. We just want to make sure everyone gets credit for this. And you will get a follow-up email so that you can complete a survey to get your CEUs or certificate of attendance. Just one additional thing I wanted to note is next Tuesday, October 20th at 3 p.m., we will be doing a conference for supporting the artistry of change. And that's going to be presented by Keith Tremblay and Karen Tansky. So again, that's next Tuesday, October 20th at 3 o'clock. And thank you again so much, everyone, for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much, Dean.
See you, April.
Bye.
Okay, it's